Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Mountain View. We are, is anybody out there?
What's up?
I'm sorry, we're so used to talking to kids when we say stuff like that, they just like scream in our faces, so sorry. You're just more quiet. If this is your first time, we just want to say welcome. We are so glad you're here. I just hope this morning is such a blessing for you. My name is Alyssa. I'm the kids director here.
And I'm Kylie. I'm the kids coordinator here.
And we are just in this season of giving thanks, and there's so much to be thankful for. I was thinking this morning just being so grateful for this church. I'm so excited for Christmas. I'm already like in that mindset. Silent night. I hope we can do the candles this year, Ryan. Silent night. Oh, holy night. But next week, I'm skipping ahead to Christmas already. Next week is our Thanksgiving church service.
Yeah, so we'll be sharing stories and worshiping together and just spending some time reflecting on this past year and all the amazing things that happened and just how thankful we are as a community and as a church and as a family. So if you feel led to share, come prepared with something, and we'll have a microphone for you, and it's just going to be really awesome. It's always one of my favorite services.
Very special service. And speaking about giving thanks, we are up here because we are so grateful for all of our volunteers all across Mountain View, but especially all of our kids ministry volunteers. God is doing something so amazing here at Mountain View, and there are so many kids that run through these doors every single Sunday, and we are so grateful. We couldn't do any of this without our volunteers who just love on your kids, who pour into them, who are teaching them about the love of Jesus, and we have a huge need, so that is why we're up here. Our church is growing, more kids are coming, and we need more help. So we actually, believe it or not, we have the spaces for them, but we need some classrooms to be open. So we need some more teachers, and there's a whole variety of roles. So we're going to kind of show you what that would look like, asking for help.
So with our babies, toddlers, and preschools, those are the kinds of classes where we just need someone who is willing to play with them, hold them, maybe do some crafts. Like she said, we have amazing teachers in preschool and toddlers where we have lessons. So if you feel led to just be another set of hands, a helper to that teacher, or even if you do feel led to teach, then that would be really awesome. We're always in need of that, and it's something where if you feel it on your heart that you just want to pour into that next generation and to just keep building that up and to be a part of that, it's an amazing way to get involved. That's where I started in kids ministry, and
now look at her.
It's a soft spot for me. I love it. But yeah.
And then we also have volunteer roles for our upper elementary, so even kindergarten first all the way up to 5th grade. Lots of just fun, high energy. The teachers are doing an amazing job. They prepare the lessons, so all we would need is somebody to come and just be that extra support and hang out and love on those kids. Until you hear that there's a need, you could just be sitting here week after week thinking like, they've got it, they're doing their thing. I was sitting where you were, and I kind of felt this tugging on my heart, like, I wonder if they need help. No, they're probably good. This is at my other church. Here I am today because I kind of took that step when I finally heard somebody get up and say, we're really short-staffed. Like, we really need extra help. There's, some amazing stuff happening here at this church, and these little ones need extra volunteers and help and teachers. So we're doing that now. So if you have any interest at all, or you just want to ask some questions or come take a little tour, come talk to us after service, come and find any of us. It goes, every ministry at Mountain View is in need of some help, and that brings us to youth.
If you're not interested in helping with little kids, because there's some people who just, it's not their thing.
But they're cute. They're really cute.
If you like older kids, junior high and high school, and even our refuge team, all those ministries need help. Junior high and high school are going to camp very, very soon. Sign-ups are right now, so if you have a student or a child in one of those, definitely get them signed up, because those were my favorite memories growing up. I grew up going to this church, and those camps are so grounding and just so helpful, and so much of it is because of the leaders. And if you feel led to pour into those kids and to be a volunteer there, then they definitely need the help. You can contact Matt and Hannah. But yeah, sign your kids up if you have them in junior high or high school.
Absolutely. So thank you. Sorry, it's a lot of like, we need this, but reality is amazing stuff's happening. You would probably be in agreement with us. God's doing some big stuff here at Mountain View, and that's just the reality. With more people coming in and checking it out and calling Mountain View home, we need more hands on deck. And it's a great way to get connected, too, even if you're new, even if you're just checking it out and you want to meet some awesome people and be a part of a team. But that's it for announcements. Thank you guys for your time. Here's the Bible Project video, and then you also get a special treat, a first at Mountain View. Pastor Todd is on his way to Italy right now with Tracy. So they filmed the first service, so you'll get his entire message on video after the Bible Project. So enjoy.
We've been exploring how biblical narratives work, and it turns out stories in the Bible are like any other story. You've got to pay attention to the characters, the setting, and the plot.
Yeah, these are the basic tools an author uses to help readers see the meaning and significance of the events. Now, it's time to learn one final skill that will bring all these elements together: how to detect design patterns in biblical narrative.
What do you mean by design patterns?
Well, the biblical authors have shaped all these elements, character, setting, and plot, to create series of repeated patterns that weave through story after story and tie them all together. When you notice these patterns, you'll see how different stories across the whole Bible have been coordinated to emphasize key themes.
This sounds interesting, but how do you know how to find a biblical pattern?
Well, biblical authors do it subtly. The best way to catch on is to watch them embed key words and images that link stories together. Take, for example, one of the main themes of the Bible, the complex and tragic human condition.
Okay.
So let's start at the beginning, where God is making a really good world.
Right, 7 times it says God saw that it was good.
So those are clearly important words. Now watch. God appoints 2 characters named Human and Life to rule this world on his behalf, and they're told that everything is good for them to eat.
Except for the tree of knowing good and evil.
So then the humans doubt God, and in Genesis we read, they see that it's good to take this knowledge for themselves. Then we read, they desire to become wise. And then finally, they take what they want.
And everything falls apart. This story is about the human condition.
And on its own, it's a really powerful story, but the biblical authors don't leave it there. They turn it into a pattern. It happens again with Abraham and Sarah. God brings them into the promised land, promises them a child. But they don't trust God, they get impatient, and we read the same words. They see their Egyptian slave, they take her and do what is good in their eyes. Do you get it?
Yeah, the stories match.
Then you get to Aaron at Mount Sinai, and we read how he sees and then takes the gold of the Israelites to make the golden calf. Or there's the story about Achan, who sees the gold of the Canaanites, he desires it and takes it for himself.
This pattern highlights how one person's temptation can create suffering for many people.
Exactly. It's just like the story of Saul, where we read that the Israelites see him. They desire him and take him as their king so they can be like all the other nations.
And Saul's reign leads them to destruction.
Or there's the story of David, which says that he sees Bathsheba, he desires her and then takes her and then kills her husband.
And then David's family starts destroying each other.
So you see, it's just one basic theme repeated over and over. These stories are all designed to show the temptation pattern.
Which is kind of a downer.
But the repetition builds up anticipation. Perhaps someone will come and break the pattern. This is why the stories of Jesus have been designed to carry the patterns forward to their climax.
Really?
Yeah, like what does Jesus say when he's faced with his greatest temptation to avoid dying on the cross?
Not my desire, but your desire be done.
So the pattern flips, and you have one person resisting temptation, and his suffering provides life for many.
Very cool. Can we do one more?
Totally. How about a big one? How God brings humanity through chaotic waters into a new world. It starts on page 1, where God separates these dark, chaotic waters.
Yeah, dry land emerges as a home for humans to flourish.
Then the pattern reappears with the chaotic waters of the flood. God rescues this remnant, Noah and his family, through the waters so that they can step onto dry land and become humanity 2.0. Now, does that basic storyline remind you of anything else?
Oh, right, the famous Exodus story.
Yeah, exactly. That's when God saves his chosen people from Egypt by leading them through the waters onto dry land.
while Pharaoh and his army is destroyed.
The pattern repeats later with Joshua and the Israelites.
They pass through the waters of the Jordan into the Promised Land.
Yeah, you got it. So now you can see how later biblical authors will project this pattern into the future. Like Isaiah, he hoped for a new Exodus with a new king, leading God's people forward into a new creation. And in this repetition, the nations become the chaotic waters.
So you can see how combining all these patterns brings us to Jesus.
Yeah, notice how all the Gospels highlight that story of Jesus going to the Jordan River. He goes into the waters and back out again.
His baptism.
That's when God announces that Jesus is his son, who will rescue the world from the chaos of our evil and violence by going into death and out the other side. This is why baptism became such a big deal for Jesus' followers. It's about participating in this ancient pattern, going through the waters of death, following Jesus into the new creation.
These design patterns seem really important.
Yeah, they're actually the main way biblical authors have unified these hundreds of stories together. And every pattern develops a core theme throughout the whole biblical story that leads to Jesus.
Great. That's biblical narrative, which makes up over 40% of the Bible. Now, another 30% is made up of ancient poetry.
And learning to read biblical poetry is what we'll explore in the next videos.
Now, we're actually not going to continue on with biblical poetry at this time. We'll come back to it at another time. But we have been looking at how to read the Bible. And it's been a great series. I can't believe we're already coming to the end of this. We've been practicing using the gospel according to Mark. And today we're going to continue in it. And I'm glad you're here for this. I'm glad to be able to finish this out with you. Lots of you have been doing it in your groups and also doing it here. But I want to tell you, if you are, this is awesome. This is a packed service. Those of you that are here in this service, this is a great place to be. Really glad you're here. For those who aren't here in this service, you're watching on video today because you're not in the service. I actually have to play the second service on video today because I got to get out of town. I was made plans this summer. Was a really hard summer for my family. Tracy, my wife's mother, died, and our son and told us they were getting divorced the same week. And so we were just having a rough summer. And Monty Kelso, a wise man, once told me, happiness is having tickets. And so I said, okay. And there was a Travel Zoo deal that came into my inbox that was like too good to pass up to like go for a week to Italy for, cheap. And I'm like, we are going to Italy for my birthday. And so I booked it like back in the summer. Yeah, it's really cool. We're very excited. And I booked it in the summer, and it said that the trip was at 5 o'clock. But I guess when you book one of those package deals, they might change the time on you. And so I got an email this week that we're leaving at 3, so I got to get there a little earlier to LA. And so we will be, if you're hearing this, you are watching me on video in the second service. But you guys get me live. And here's what I want to tell you. This book of Mark has been, for the longest time, it's been one of my favorite books in the Bible. And I've probably taught through it as a whole more than any other book. When I first became a Christian, it was probably one of the first books I read. I came to Christ at a camp, and my youth pastor said, read the Gospel of Mark. And I read it in like 2 hours, and then I called him back. I said, now what? And he's like, read the Gospel of John. And I love all the Gospels, all of the Gospel stories. There's 4 in the Scriptures that are the Gospel according to each of these. And they all have different, styles, different things that have been selected by the person who was authoring it. And this one is just one of my favorites. But you can't really get it as a whole unless you read it in one sitting. And so I want to challenge you, even just today at the beginning of this, if you haven't sat down and read the Gospel according to Mark in one sitting, it'll take you about 2 hours if you're kind of an average speed reader. Read it. Take some time and just read the whole thing, because you catch stuff like these design patterns it's talking about that you don't catch when you just read it a piece at a time. You have to kind of see the big picture. And one of the things that you're going to catch is just how this story builds We started at the very beginning. The gospel, according to Mark, starts with saying this is the good news, the beginning of the good news about Jesus, the Messiah or the Christ, the anointed one, the King, the Son of God. And then the story goes on where it's basically showing you why this is good news. And very early on, it looks like some kind of good news, that what would the world be like if God's kingdom came and his will was done on earth as it is in heaven? You see Jesus going around talking about how God's kingdom is at hand and it's breaking in, and everywhere he goes, he does things that God would do if God was in charge, like heal sick people, like feed hungry people, like cast out demons out of people that are tormented, like teach good news to people, like tell people about what God is really like and show them what God is really like. Jesus is showing and demonstrating and bringing this good news everywhere he goes. But then we see during the story God actually speaking out of heaven, and God keeps calling him, "This is my son, this is my beloved son, in whom I'm well pleased. This is my son, listen to him." And it reinforces those early things where it said that he's the Son of God. But there's only one human character that catches on that Jesus is the Son of God, and it's toward the very end. You have demons actually saying Jesus is the Son of God throughout. Every time Jesus is casting out demons, they keep saying, "Oh, you're the Son of God, you're the Son of God." And Jesus goes, "Be quiet, don't tell anybody." And then, you see Jesus doing all of these things, and he starts teaching and telling his disciples that he's going to go and he's going to be crucified and he's going to rise from the dead on the third day. He says it over and over again to his disciples as they're journeying toward Jerusalem. And then you have this strange processional where Jesus rides in to Jerusalem. We know it as Palm Sunday, in this royal procession, and people are throwing down palm branches and saying, "Blessed be the King who comes in the name of the Lord." And all of these royal things about this king, but all of the expectations that people have. And then Jesus, in this ironic twist, if you read chapter 15, there's this enthronement ceremony where the king is given a crown and he's given a scepter. And he has a guy on his right and a guy on his left. And this king is given a royal purple robe, and he's got a sign over his head that says that he's the King of the Jews. And he's crucified by the powers of Rome in collusion with the powers of the religious establishment in Jerusalem. And at the high point of this story, there's this Roman centurion, a commander of 100 men, who's in charge of the crucifixion. And he sees how Jesus dies, and he sees how it says the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And then Jesus breathes his last, and this man, this Roman outsider, gets it. And he says, "Surely this man was the Son of God." And then Jesus is buried, and a guy comes, one of the Jewish council members the religious leaders are the ones that condemned Jesus to death, but this was the dissenting member who, at risk of his own life, asked for the body of Jesus so he could put it in his own tomb. He puts the body in a tomb. There's explicit, comments that Mark writes down about the women that saw where he was laid, just in case somebody came up with a story that said, well, maybe they went to the wrong tomb. And then he rests. It's the Sabbath day. And on the Sabbath, even God rested in the early creation accounts. And here, Jesus rests in the grave. And then there's this last part. And the ending of this book is really my favorite part. And so I want to read it with you. It's just 8 verses in chapter 16. And there's 2 other endings in the book of Mark, and sometimes you'll read through and you'll see it, but you'll always see in your Bibles they usually have a footnote and they're in brackets because they can tell that they weren't the original endings. The styles are different on the other endings. You could see, though, why someone would add these other endings. Because when you read this ending of the book, that's the original, like the earliest manuscripts that we have, how it ends, you're going to want to write a new ending. You're going to go, what? That's not how it ends. Have you ever watched one of those movies where you're like, are you kidding me? I just watched 2 hours just for that? That's how this is. But watch. When the Sabbath was passed, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so they might anoint him. They might go and anoint him. That was how they prepared the bodies. They would prepare spices and they would kind of wrap them up kind of like a mummy, because when they put them in these tombs, they were family kind of tombs that were cut out into rock, and they would lay the body on a shelf. They would wrap it up with spices to cut down on the smell as the body decomposed. And then they would come back maybe a year later, once the body was decomposed, and take the bones and put them into a bone box or an ossuary, and then they put them back on a different shelf, and that would be kind of the final resting place. It was kind of a 2-stage burial, the way that the Jewish people did burial in those days. And so they came to anoint him. And very early, on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. And they were saying to one another, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb? And looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled back, and it was very large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him? But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. Then you'll see him, just as he told you. I just have to make a note on that. This man who's sitting there, we presume is an angel because, that's kind of, I don't know, how did this guy know otherwise? Who's this guy? But that's the weird thing about it. Usually, sometimes these angels appear, they don't look like some kind of an angel. It's not got big wings or anything like that. It's just like a dude sitting in a toga on the right side of the tomb. And this guy says, go tell the disciples and Peter. I love the care of God, because if you were reading this story, you would know that Peter, and even as we talked last week, Peter was the one who had sworn up and down that he would defend Jesus to his death. And Peter was the one that had denied that he even knew him 3 times, just as Jesus had said, and probably had all kinds of shame, probably felt like, man, he needed to be demoted. Maybe he shouldn't be a disciple anymore. He had failed Jesus, but there was nothing to be a disciple of anyway because, their leader was dead. But God wanted Peter to know. I love the care of God that he actually cares enough to just single Peter out to go. He needs to know this good news. So anyway, the angel says this, and then the last line is this. And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. The end. And what's crazy, and there's a lot of scholars, some scholars think that maybe the original ending was lost, like the copy of the original was mutilated and it just kind of got cut off there. And so these later endings are basically like mashups of stuff that you would get in the other Gospels, like the ending of Luke or Matthew, or basically one of the endings is kind of like a summary of the book of Acts. And they're things that somebody would have written that would have known the story and how it finished. But there's something about the original ending that way that I like. And I just think, well, if he intended it, I think it's actually a pretty interesting intention, because the pattern, if you see it in this book, has been amazing. And you don't see it unless you read it as a whole. But if you're reading through, one of the things you'll notice is that Jesus is always telling people to keep quiet. Don't say anything. When Jesus comes on the scene, he's casting out demons. They're all saying, "You're the Son of God. You're the Son of the Blessed One." And Jesus says, "Shh, be quiet. Come out of him." He won't let the demons speak because they knew who he was. And then when Jesus heals people, he won't let them tell. He's like, heals a blind guy. Hey, don't tell anybody. Don't even go back into the city. Heals somebody else. Don't tell anybody. All the time, Jesus has this thing, don't tell anybody. He asks his disciples, who do people say that I am? Peter says, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Or you're the Christ, the Messiah. Jesus says, don't tell anybody. Again and again through this story, don't tell anybody, don't tell anybody, don't tell anybody. Now, finally, this angel tells the best news. And remember, this story is the beginning of the good news. It's all about news, and you're not supposed to tell anybody. And now, finally, at the very end, the best news of all, he's risen from the dead. Go tell it. It's just like he said. He said he was going to go ahead of you. He's going to be there. Go tell the disciples and Peter. It's good news. And they run away, and they don't tell anybody because they're afraid. Kind of begs the question, when was the last time you told somebody the good news? I think if we really believe this good news that Jesus is the anointed one, the King, the Christ, the Messiah, and that he's really the Son of God and the Son of Man, as he always said, this character who from the book of Daniel was prophesied would overcome being trampled by the beasts of pagan empire. All the empires of the world that just trample him, the Son of Man, under its feet. And then that he would rise from that and then ascend to heaven to sit at God's right hand and to have all authority in heaven and on earth given to him so that he might rule. That he is not only the rightful king of Israel, but the king of the world. That he is, as he says, making all things new. The one who was trampled by the beast has overcome the power of death and is seated at the right hand of God. If you really believe that good news, don't you think you ought to tell somebody? See, the gospel and Christianity, it's personal, but it's not private. Right? It's personal because God's a person and he wants to have a personal relationship with you. It's personal because as individuals, we either believe or we don't, and we have to act on that belief personally. It's our response is personal. But the news itself is not personal news. The news itself is like universal, it's why the church took on the name universal in the early days, because that's what Catholic means, is universal. It means it's for everybody. It's good news for the whole world. Because there's a new king on the throne. The king of Israel was enthroned by being crucified, strangely, because he's showing us what God is like and that God would rather be killed by us than to kill us. And he is crucified, and in doing that, takes all of the violence of the world and all of what Israel was asking for in wanting to overthrow the Romans and continue the cycle of violence where, you kill us, we kill you worse, right? It's just how the whole cycle goes throughout the whole history of the world. And Jesus all of a sudden says, no, we're not going to do it that way. We're going to turn the other cheek. We're going to be killed rather than kill. We're going to overcome the power of evil by letting it do its worst. And then we're going to break that power by rising from the dead. And this is good news because death now, because of what Jesus did as the Son of Man, as the human representative, not just as this Israel representative of Messiah, but as the Son of Man and the representative of humanity, and as the Son of God, as God's own very manifestation of who he is. Jesus comes and he does what he did on behalf of all of us. It has implications for the whole world. It means death has an expiration date. See, not just Jesus' death, but your death too. What it meant for early Christians, and this is why Christianity spread so fast all over the empire, what it meant is death doesn't have the last word, and they can't kill you. I mean, yes, they can kill you, but they can't keep you dead. Because even if they kill you, God can raise you like he did for Jesus. Which is why the cross, which was a symbol of terror used by the empire to threaten all who would rebel against the empire, the beasts of the world. See, that's death. That's what they've got hanging over your head, right? If you don't follow the law, I mean, you can go to jail. And ultimately what jail is it takes away your life and your privileges and your ability to live your life in freedom. And then if you're really bad, the ultimate thing we can do to you is kill you. If you don't agree with us, if you don't do what we want, if you don't fall into line, the governments, the beasts, the powers, the principalities and powers of this world, they can kill you. And what happened was the Christians said, okay, they killed Jesus and he came back. So if you kill me, I'm coming back too. And so they were not afraid in the face of death, which is why when Christianity spread and persecution broke out, it didn't stop it. And the Christians didn't fight back. They didn't say, we'll show you. We need to fight for our rights. Like, no, they said, okay, kill me. God will raise me. And I don't say that lightly, because I know there are Christians all over the world who are persecuted for their faith, and some of them killed. Some of you have had friends that have been killed in this room. And I know. But it's because of the courage to say, Jesus is king, and not in a way of saying like, oh, I'll show you, Jesus is king. And it's not an argumentative. It's like, this is good news. This is how God rules. And the good news is that even if you kill us, we come back. The powers can't control us anymore. And not only that, we have representation. We have one of us sitting on the throne in heaven. One of us meaning like a human. See, because Jesus was not only the Son of God, he was the incarnation of God's presence on earth, but he was a human being 100%, and he still is a human being, a risen human being, who is seated on the throne next to God, in ruling with his Father. And that's the claim that we make, and that the Bible is making, and that Christianity is making. And it's good news. And if you believe it, man, we got to tell somebody. But maybe you're afraid too. I wonder what these women were afraid of. Were they afraid that it's too good to be true? Were they afraid that it might be true, but they'd have to change? Were they afraid that people might not understand and they think they were crazy? I'm thinking about when when the angel or this young man said, go tell the disciples and Peter. I wonder why they didn't go tell the disciples and Peter right away. Like, what did they think? Like, that just wasn't important news for those guys to know? Like, of all people, don't you think those guys would have wanted to know? They had followed Jesus all this time, and like, if this is true, why wouldn't they run straight back and tell him? I don't know what it is that makes us not tell people when it's such good news. I mean, if somebody's like, if you got really bad news and you're like, man, I don't know how to break up with this person, like, how am I going to do that? Like, that's different. But when you got such good news, like, you won the lottery, don't you want to tell them? Well, the Bible format that the Bible studies that we've been doing in our small groups has had these questions, and we've asked, what does this tell us about God? What does it tell us about humanity? Because I really think those two questions are just beautiful questions for anywhere in the Bible, but specifically because all the Bible points to Jesus. As Ryan said, we're a centered set. We believe Jesus is the center of all of it, and all of it points to him. And he shows us both what's truest about God and what's truest about humanity. So those are two good questions. There's two other questions that are in the Bible study that are really important to the flow of it, because the next question is, what is God calling you to do in response? Because, faith needs to be enacted, and our faith is something that we actually do something with. And so What is God calling you to do about it? And then the last question is this question, who are you going to tell? And if your groups have gone the way they're supposed to go, those two questions are the things that you ask at the beginning of the next group. It's like, who did you share with this last week? And, what did you do? How did it go with doing the thing that God called you to do? Because then there's accountability for like what we've committed to. And I love this as an approach to the Bible. And I learned this from some friends in the Middle East. We had a guy, Nadim Costa, that came and spoke here a while back, and he had shared with us about this Discovery Bible studies and the way that they are just growing all over the Middle East and in these refugee camps. And when we work with kids around the world and we do Bible story clubs, they teach the Bible stories this way to the kids. But the Bible, the gospel is becoming viral throughout the Middle East, and especially in the Muslim world, partly because Jesus is showing up to people in dreams and doing all kinds of miraculous things. That's amazing. Partly because in the midst of incredible persecution and crisis and the refugee crisis and people being displaced from their homes, they're seeing what radical Islam looks like in the Middle East, and they're open to a different way or a different interpretation of God. But what's happening is these people that are just coming to Christ, they're like brand new Christians, are hearing the good news, and then they're obeying it, and then they're going and telling somebody, and it's spreading like a virus. Like the flu, they keep trying to get you to get the flu shot every time you go to like Kaiser or wherever you go. Viruses spread person to person. And that's how this gospel message spreads. And it spreads especially when you have this element of who are you going to tell? This is good news. You've got to tell somebody. And if you really believe it's good news, man, tell somebody. Tell somebody. The fastest growing Christian movements in the world are happening among Muslim populations where they're reading the Bible and they're asking these simple questions. In Lebanon and Egypt and Iraq, there's these Syrian refugees. And even in Iran, I watched a film. One of the fastest growing churches in the world is happening in Iran, and Iran is totally close to the spread of the gospel. But because people are meeting in homes secretly and mostly led by women, like these first women are the ones given the charge to go and bring the message to the disciples. I don't know how people miss that. But women are leading in the church because they are leading these studies because they're not afraid. They're saying, listen, I got good news and I just need to share it with you. Jesus is king, and he's not just the Jewish Messiah of Israel. He is that, and he was that for them, and he died as their Messiah. But he also is the Son of God and the Son of Man, who has been trampled by the powers, has ascended to the right hand of heaven, and he is working all things together for our good. He is our human representative seated on the throne next to his Father. He is our advocate who is praying for us, who is advocating for us, who is saying, all of their sins were forgiven. I took care of all of that. Jesus has done that and is king and is seated there. And we have such good news, and we can share this news. What if we shared the good news? I want to challenge you in this season. We're coming into a season of Christmas. And this holiday season, everybody is like, Christmas is a public holiday. And it's still not illegal to say Merry Christmas. But even so, and it's not just something to fight about, it's just something to say, listen, I want to share this good news with my neighbors, with my friends, with my family. We're going to try to tell the story around here in different ways that'll be exposed it for people that have never heard the good news of the gospel. They've celebrated maybe Christmas all their life, but they don't really understand what it means and what Jesus did. And we're going to share that story here, and you can invite people to be your guests. All through this season and up to Christmas Eve, we'll have 3 services here on Christmas Eve at 1, 3, and 5. And those services will definitely be a great place to bring people to hear the good news of the gospel. But listen, it's not just bringing them here. You can tell them good news. You can tell them the good news of what God's done in your life. That's what happens again and again in these stories. There's one story where a guy gets delivered from all kinds of demons. He's the one that was living in a graveyard. He's cutting himself. Nobody can restrain him. He's kind of got this major madness thing going on, and Jesus delivers him from these demons. And then the people from his town were more scared that he was in his right mind than they were about the fact that there were all these demons in him before. But Jesus says, listen, go back to your people and tell everybody what God did for you. See, part of the good news is sharing what God's done for you. But part of it is if you just believe this is good news, it's good news for everybody. And we need to share it. That God has revealed himself. I mean, we believe as Christians that God has revealed himself ultimately by becoming a human. And we as humans were created to be like God. And he showed us what that looks like. We had a bunch of friends from the Pacifica Institute. This is a Turkish group, mostly Muslims. And they were here last week, and they shared pudding with us, and some of you met them. And out of that conversation and out of that relationship in the last few years, we've been trying to build relationships with them. There were some of us that went and had dinner with them during Ramadan to kind of learn about their culture and meet them. Listen, when we do these things, it doesn't mean you're like saying that our differences don't matter or that our theological differences aren't, like all God is just the same. No, our God has revealed himself through Jesus, and that is a huge distinctive. We can't compromise that. We don't need to pretend that's not the case, but we also don't need to just be argumentative. What Jesus showed us is that God is good, and he loves us, and he has dinner with people that he doesn't necessarily agree with, and they have discussions, and he extends God's love to them. So we had an opportunity that came up to do something in this Christmas season where people are coming from all over the world, and they are immigrants, and they have not really experienced Christmas and what it looks like for us. And so I want to invite a friend up to share a little bit about this. This is Tim Hardy. Would you give Tim a hand?
Good morning, everyone. It's good to be with you. For the last couple of years, my wife and I, or our family, have held some Christmas celebrations in our home. And the unique thing about these Christmas celebrations is that we invite some of our family and some of our friends, but we also invite our Muslim neighbors to come join us. And the reason that we want to do that is we're all about the relationship. We're all about, we all have a story. God's given us a story, and we want to share that story. But we also want to listen and learn other people's stories as well. And what a great time to do that. It's a natural thing over the Christmas holidays to invite someone into your home and say, let's celebrate together. For many of our Muslim friends, they've never experienced anything like that. They see that as a Christian holiday, and it's something that they're not a part of. But we want to invite them into that. And the reason I want to not meet with you, well, actually, I would love to meet with you as well. But we want to invite Mountain View into the same thing. We want to, over the next couple weeks, have Christmas dinners in our homes where we're going to invite our Turkish friends from the Pacifica Institute to come join us, to come to your house. And so some of you are like, oh, I totally want to do that. And some of you are frightened and scared. It's okay. That's okay. But we want to invite you into that. Some of you are like, I don't really have a place to house, but maybe you will still want to be involved. Would you come talk to us? Come talk to me at the connection table. Our hope and desire is to have a number of these taking place from December 1st through the 15th or so. And just so you know, we're going to coach you in that. We're not just going to like, hey, here's some Muslims that are coming to your house. Have fun. All right? And you will have a good time. Some of the highlights of my year have been with my Iranian friends, joking around the table, joking about life, hearing stories. It's an opportunity for you to experience some of the same things. Why? Because we have been blessed in such an amazing way, but the blessing doesn't stop and land upon us, does it? It needs to flow through us. What a great opportunity for us to do that. So if you're interested, if you want more information, if you sign your email or give me your cell phone, you're not necessarily committing. I'm 100% in this, but you're curious and want to know more. So let's stand together and let's pray. Father, thank you so much for the truth of your word. Lord, thank you that you have invited us into your story from eternity past to eternity future, Lord. You are redeeming, you are restoring your creation, Lord, and you have invited us into that. And our stories matter because our stories are connected to the kingdom of kings. So, Lord, use each and